Thomas Forrester strode into the lofty atrium of Forrester Creations one crisp autumn morning, flanked by Paris Buckingham on his arm, her champagne blonde hair gleaming under the chandelier lights, her couture gown whispering secrets of Parisian ateliers, and his grin stretched from ear to ear as though he were unveiling a masterpiece rather than a mere announcement. The hushed designers and executives who had gathered for the weekly creative briefing froze mid-conversation, pattern swatches dangling from their fingertips, when Thomas raised a single, gleaming hand to call for attention. "I have news," he declared, his voice echoing across the marble floors with the same theatrical flourish he'd once reserved for launching his own ill-fated fashion line. "Paris and I have wed." In that instant, the air seemed to crack like a glass harp string. Cameras clicked as photographers hidden in shadow chronicled the reveal. Murmurs rippled through every corner of the building. Thomas, the prodigal son and perpetual schemer, had married Paris, the one woman as accustomed to high society spectacle as he was to designer sabotage. The announcement was both audacious and inevitable, a testament to Thomas's relentless appetite for reinvention and Paris's flair for forging her own headlines. But no one could have foreseen the chain reaction it would unleash. Hope Logan Spencer, already reeling from recent tragedies that had claimed the lives of Steffi and Finn, felt as though the floor had fallen out from beneath her. She had once welcomed Thomas's presence, and by extension Douglas's loving uncle, into her home with cautious optimism, convinced that he could be the stabilizing influence her son desperately needed. But Thomas's sudden flaunt of marital bliss with Paris, showcased in a glossy social media post complete with doctored wedding invitations and snatched selfies on a yacht beneath the Eiffel Tower, felt to Hope like a betrayal of every promise of redemption he'd ever whispered in her ear. Furious and unmoored, she raced through the halls of Spencer Publications, her heels clicking like gavel blows, and summoned her lawyer with a single order: file for sole custody of Douglas. The legal papers landed on Thomas's desk with a slap loud enough to wake the ghosts of every courtroom drama the Spencer family had ever weathered. Hope's affidavit cited Thomas's instability, his penchant for publicity stunts, and his sudden, secretive nuptials with a woman Riley Dawson had once described as an opportunist with a fondness for champagne and chaos. In her heart, Hope believed she was acting to shield Douglas from the emotional tornado now swirling around his family name. But she could not anticipate how her move would cleave Forrester and Spencer alike, pitting allegiances against one another at a time when unity was most desperately needed. Brooke Logan, seated in the corner office she had claimed as her own private sanctuary, received the news via a terse phone call from Taylor Hayes, whose voice crackled with a mixture of anger and wounded pride. Brooke, still navigating the aftermath of Ridge's engagement to Taylor and nursing her own bruised heart, recognized the stakes instantly. A bitter custody battle would plaster both Spencer and Forrester across every tabloid, strip the brand of its polished veneer, and risk alienating the very clients whose orders fueled their haute couture empire. Yet Brooke's maternal instincts surged to the fore. Douglas was, after all, the grandson of Bill Spencer and the nephew of the Logan Spencer dynasty. To stand by while Thomas paraded a new wife and surrendered their cherished boy to more of Thomas's erratic theatrics seemed unthinkable. She dialed her old friend and rival, Taylor Hayes, her tone measured but firm. "We need to talk about Hope's filing," Brooke said, and in that instant the rift between them yawned wider than any unauthorized design draft could. Taylor, reeling from Thomas's perceived betrayal of their fragile truce, he had once vowed to protect Douglas as fiercely as his own blood, rebuffed Brooke's overtures. "He's Douglas's uncle, Brooke. And right now, Thomas is more stable than Hope ever believed," Taylor countered, her voice edged with defiance. "This is about family, not PR." Thus began a legal war that carved deep trenches through the intertwined Logan and Forrester clans. Depositions were scheduled in the vaulted boardroom of Forrester Creations, where attorneys for Hope and Thomas faced off beneath the portraits of patriarch Eric Forrester that lined the walls. Ridge hovered between them, torn between loyalty to his daughter's friend and the imperative to protect the family brand he had built from the ground up. Media vans lined the driveway outside, their satellite dishes rotating like impatient beasts, and reporters clamored for sound bites. Would Ridge back his son or his daughter-in-law? Would Brooke, the public face of Forrester so many times over, side with Hope to preserve her reputation or with Thomas to honor the blood ties he shared with the family? With every legal maneuver filed and counterfiled, the courtroom drama spilled onto social media. #FreeDouglas trended alongside #TeamThomas and #HopeForHope, fracturing families online even as Ridge scrambled to rally his teams behind the brand's next collection. Under mounting pressure, Ridge called an emergency meeting in the sunlit atelier, where models once twirled in diaphanous chiffon. He stood at the head of the room, ringed by mannequins draped in his most exquisite gowns, and addressed the assembled designers, publicists, and board members in a voice that quavered with exhaustion. "This custody battle cannot define us," he pleaded. "We need both sides of this family united if we are to weather the storm." But Brooke and Taylor, seated on opposite sides of the long walnut table, exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Brooke's eyes narrowed as Taylor's jaw clenched. Their shared history of love triangles and betrayals had become the very currency of power within these walls, and neither woman was prepared to cede moral high ground in the face of Thomas's sensational wedding and Hope's scorched-earth legal strategy. Meanwhile, the courtroom filings took on an almost operatic scope. Hope's lawyers presented a timeline of Thomas's erratic behavior, late-night calls from Paris Buckingham's number, lavish spending sprees, and defamation suits he had once threatened against the Forrester family. Thomas's counsel countered with testimony about his steadfast devotion to Douglas, evidence of his financial stability since marrying Paris, and character witnesses who attested to his capacity for love and responsibility. The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for swift rulings, considered each argument in meticulous silence, her gavels punctuating the weekly hearings like drumbeats of fate. Every session made headlines. Uncle or opportunist, custody clash at Forrester, will Douglas's best interests be served? And the public watched with rapt attention as the fate of one young boy became the fulcrum on which two dynasties balanced. Back at Forrester Creations, designers found themselves second-guessing every stitch of every dress. Would clients abandon the brand for the Spencer line? Would the marriage of Thomas and Paris overshadow the debut of Ridge's couture collection at Fashion Week? Brooke and Taylor, once collaborators in vision and rivalry in romance, now exchanged curt emails about runway schedules and photo shoot dates, their professional rapport splintering under the weight of personal allegiances. Ridge tried to broker truces, suggesting joint appearances at charity events to showcase family unity and maintain the brand's glamorous aura. But each public outing, whether a gala or a press conference, only served as a reminder of the fault lines between them. The cameras catching Brooke's forced smile and Taylor's tight embrace of Ridge in side-by-side snapshots that contradicted the words pledging solidarity. As the weeks led up to the final court hearing, Hope discovered new leverage. A contract clause in Thomas's marriage license that revealed Paris Buckingham's prenuptial stipulations, listing Douglas as a potential inheritance beneficiary. Hope's attorney pounced, arguing that such a clause treated Douglas as a bargaining chip rather than a beloved nephew, and Thomas's team faced a fresh crisis of optics. Paris, ever the strategist, attempted to issue a public statement declaring her unconditional love for Douglas, but the message rang hollow against the backdrop of her own prenuptial generosity. Ridge, watching his niece's future held ransom to his son's ambition, finally broke his silence in a televised interview. "Family comes before fashion. I hope we can all remember that." The words were sincere, but the tension in his eyes betrayed the impossible position he occupied. needing both Brooke's influence and Taylor's creative genius to salvage Forrester Creations' flagship collection while respecting his role as judge, father, and brand guardian. On the day of the custody verdict, the courtroom was packed to capacity with press, onlookers, and family members forced to sit on opposite sides of the aisle. Ridge sat between Brooke and Taylor, his shoulders squared against the murmurs, as the judge delivered a ruling that sought compromise. Joint custody of Douglas, with primary residence to Hope and guaranteed visitation rights for Thomas, his new marriage notwithstanding. The decree was greeted with a mixture of relief and frustration. Hope breathed a shaky sigh of victory for securing her son's home. Thomas exhaled in triumph that neither his marriage nor his reputation had been irretrievably damaged. And Brooke and Taylor exchanged an uncertain glance, as though the judge's attempt to heal the family might prove as fragile as the stitches on a gown in progress. In the aftermath, Forrester Creations announced a postponement of Ridge's new collection until the family could regroup, citing unforeseen personal circumstances, while the press spun fresh headlines. Forrester's fashion freeze. Custody verdict rocks couture house, and can love conquer family feud? Ridge, Brooke, and Taylor returned to the atelier late that night, the room dark except for the soft glow of mannequins bathed in moonlight through the soaring windows. They stood in silence, the weight of their shared history pressing on them more heavily than any fabric ever could. No words were spoken as they filed out one by one. Taylor headed to the nursery to reassure Douglas at Hope's house. Brooke retreated to her penthouse to process her conflicting loyalties, and Ridge remained behind. Contemplating the fragility of the empire he'd built on the passions and betrayals of those he loved most. Thus, the wedding that Thomas had flaunted as a proclamation of triumphant new beginnings had instead ignited a conflagration that threatened to consume the forges of family, brand, and legacy. The custody battle, far from merely deciding where a young boy would live, had become the battleground on which Brooke Logan and Taylor Hayes measured their worth. Ridge Forrester tested his leadership, and Hope Logan Spencer fought to protect her son's innocence. And through it all, the eyes of Los Angeles remained riveted on the bold and the beautiful, for no one could predict which alliances would endure, which reputations would be irreparably frayed, and whether the next chapter in this storied saga would bring reconciliation or another twist of knife-sharp drama. One thing, however, was certain. In the world of fine fabrics and fractured families, the most exquisite creations are sometimes born not of harmony but of conflict. And the question lingering over Forrester Creations was whether its greatest masterpiece would be the collection on the runway or the reconciliation of the souls who had torn each other apart to keep its name alive. In the uneasy calm that settled over the Forrester and Spencer families in the wake of the custody ruling, the corridors of power at both Forrester Creations and Spencer Publications hummed with whispered speculation and strategic maneuvering. Yet none of it would distract Ridge Forrester for long from the peril that still threatened his life's work. As word spread through the industry that Ridge had delayed his spring couture line, anxious clients began to pull orders or threaten to shift their allegiance to other fashion houses whose calendars remained untouched by domestic dramas. In response, Ridge convened an emergency strategy session in his private boardroom, summoning Brooke Logan, Taylor Hayes, Hope Logan Spencer, Bill Spencer, Liam Spencer, and even the newlywed couple, Thomas and Paris Forrester, Buckingham, to a meeting that would test loyalties and chart the course of the Forrester Empire's survival. He began with frank realism. Our brand stands at a crossroads. If we cannot present a collection worthy of our name by season's end, every scandal, every lawsuit, and every headline about family turmoil will spell the end of what my father and I built. I need every one of you to put the courtroom behind us, to marshal your talents, creative, financial, and relational, so that we launch not just a show, but a statement of unity and resilience. Silence stretched as each face registered the gravity of his words. Brooke, who had felt the cold sting of Taylor's earlier rebuffs, surprisingly reached across the table first, offering Taylor a tentative nod. Taylor, her tension softening, returned the gesture, and a spark of the old alliance flickered back to life. Bill Spencer leaned forward, palms flat on the mahogany surface, and declared his willingness to underwrite final production costs in exchange for a co-branded media campaign with Spencer Publications, a deal that would bring both companies into unprecedented alignment. Hope, her maternal instincts still raw from the custody battle, surprised herself by volunteering to co-host a VIP launch event at the newly renovated Forrester rooftop terrace, leveraging her own social media clout to draw influencers and philanthropists alike. Thomas, whose wedding to Paris Buckingham had dominated the gossip pages, pledged to contribute his own design sketches for a men's capsule collection, an olive branch extended with the same bravado he once used to provoke. Even Paris, whose prenuptial agreement had nearly inflamed the custody dispute further, offered her public relations expertise to manage the press around the simultaneous unveiling of Ridge's main line and Thomas's men's pieces. In that charged moment, as Ridge surveyed the unlikely coalition gathered before him, he realized that the very family fractures that threatened to tear them apart could, if harnessed, become a source of creative energy and public fascination that no rival house could match. In the weeks that followed, the Forrester production floor transformed into a hive of purpose. Designers from Brooke's studio and Taylor's atelier worked side by side on a daring concept titled Reconstructed Legacy, a silhouette-driven commentary on both the literal and metaphorical stitching together of broken relationships. Draped gowns borrowed the crisp tailoring of men's suiting for Thomas's line, while men's blazers incorporated delicate embroidery inspired by Hope's favorite floral motifs. Each look a visual metaphor for the convergence of feminine strength and masculine structure, mother and father, bride and groom. Bill Spencer's media campaign rolled out teaser ads every Monday on Spencer Weekly's homepage, each featuring a black and white image of Ridge's hands sketching a design, layered with the caption, "When legacy and reinvention collide, fashion is reborn." Hope's social media channels buzzed with behind-the-scenes glimpses of sketch sessions, late-night fittings, and candid interviews with Ridge, Brooke, and Taylor reflecting on what family meant to them now, a unity forged from conflict. Despite the underlying tension, Brooke still bristled at the sight of Taylor's natural poise in front of the sewing machines, and Taylor found her pulse quickening when Brooke, laughing with Paris over shared fabric samples, seemed to reclaim her effortless glamour. Each woman discovered that their combined vision yielded designs of unexpected depth and beauty. As the launch date approached, Ridge arranged a charitable component that spoke to both families' enduring values. Proceeds from select Reconstructed Legacy sales would fund a scholarship in Steffi and Finn's names for emerging designers and medical students, a tribute to the two souls whose sacrifice and compassion had inspired the collection's very theme of rebuilding and renewal. The announcement served multiple purposes. It honored the memories of those lost in the tragic shooting, provided a narrative of hope rising from tragedy, and reminded the public that Forrester Creations still stood for generosity and social responsibility beyond any courtroom drama or tabloid headline. Hope worked with local hospitals to identify scholarship recipients, ensuring that the beneficiaries were diverse and that Finn's beloved promise to heal and uplift would echo through the next generation. Bill Spencer leveraged his news network to profile the first scholarship awardees in a primetime special so that on the night of the runway show, viewers nationwide would see not only the gowns and tuxedos, but also the real human stories of young talents whose lives had been changed in the name of legacy. On the evening of the gala-style runway debut, the rooftop terrace was transformed into an urban garden suspended above the city lights, with cascading orchids and modern art installations framing a quicksilver catwalk. As guests arrived, celebrities, embassies, socialites, even the judge who had ruled on Douglas's custody, the tension in the air was electric. Ridge, in a midnight blue velvet tuxedo, watched from the wings as the first model emerged draped in a gown whose bodice bore the delicate floral filigree favored by Taylor, the skirt cut with the structured lines that spoke of Brooke's classic sensibility. The crowd held its breath, then burst into applause as each subsequent look revealed the seamless integration of family histories. An ivory sheath with Paris's Parisian flair, a crisp white men's suit with Thomas's dramatic lapels, and a rose-colored ensemble inspired by Hope's first appearance at a charity auction. Cameras flashed, and for the first time in months, the headlines the next morning spoke of Forrester's greatest comeback and when family fashioned the future. Yet beneath the veneer of triumph, currents of conflict still rippled. In the green room after the show, Brooke and Taylor found themselves alone amid racks of half-finished garments. Brooke, her voice soft, admitted the fear she felt when she saw Taylor's name woven into every seam that had once been exclusively her domain. Taylor, tears brimming, confessed that she had worried a resurgence of Bridge fan fervor would undo the fragile peace they had struck. In that private moment, they embraced. A hug that held the weight of years of rivalry, tears, and gradual understanding, promising to guard this hard-won unity even as they navigated the future. Meanwhile, Hope watched as Thomas slipped away from the after-party, disappearing into a dark corridor with Paris close on his heels. Liam Spencer intercepted her, handing her a glass of champagne. "He's planning another announcement, I think," Liam warned, concern flickering in his eyes. Thomas never slows down. Hope's own instincts told her that Thomas's marriage to Paris, now publicly lauded, remained as much a gambit as any scheme he had ever cooked up.
Oh,